Tiffany and Katie, welcome to Free Your Voice.
Thanks for having us. It's good to be here.
It's great to be here.
Conforming. So, my daughter Elsa is 11. She is a phenomenal athlete. And it seems to be there's so much pressure on her and her friends to excel. Talk about conforming. What are the women, girls of today? What are they experiencing, Tiffany? And then the same questions for you, Katie.
Yeah, I think the challenge is the conforming is, I think, part of growing up. There's a strong desire to be the same, and that is the measurement of, am I good enough? Am I going to have friends? And so the pressure to be the same in some capacity, whether it's, wearing the same shoes, making sure that clothing, is similar to everybody else. And then I think the pressure of, if somebody is different, will you join in on pointing out their differences or not? And I think that can be a measurement of belonging, which at that age, that's really all you want.
And for kids, it's tough, right? You think about 11 years old of you're trying to find yourself and who am I and what does resonate and feel congruent with who I am as a human versus how am I conforming and what's authentic and what's not. That's a hard task for anybody at any age, right? And the pressure that is on young people is significant. Tiffany and I have this conversation regularly that none of us could hang in a teenager's or an 11-year-old shoes for a day. They're tasked with so much.
It's this pressure that seems to be it's not sustainable. It can't be for these children. They have to continually monitor their cell phones. They have to continually monitor the text messages. They have to monitor chats. They have to think about all the girls in their pack or ladies in their pack. This can't be sustainable and it can't be good from a mental health standpoint.
Correct. And when Katie and I were writing our book, we decided to write an entire chapter about social media. And what was interesting is it started out as a small section of another chapter. And as we got into the details, it took over and needed its own space because of everything that you just named. One of the things that we really care deeply about is helping parents and adults in the lives of children to have conversations about how to utilize social media. So a lot of times the answer is get kids off of it. It's not helpful. Shut it down. It's already here. And so really it's about this relationship to social media in terms of monitoring usage. What does it feel like to be on a particular app? How are you monitoring how you're engaging with others, and really helping kids find a way to gain all the benefits from it while also being in conversation about what makes the most sense for one particular kid so that they can be making decisions for themselves along the way of how is it working for them or not.
Now, Katie, what do you think about parents? I mean, many parents expect schools to raise their children. They send them there and they're like, all right, it's your job to go fix them. It's your job to go make them better, make them into good human beings. I mean, how much ownership should parents have? And where do you think we are as a society or as a culture?
Yeah, I think, it's a very interesting question and one that is coming up a lot lately. We're getting lots of phone calls from parents across the nation saying, you need to come in and help this sport organization, or you need to talk to my athlete. And what I have started responding with is, let's start with a parents conversation, because what we know is it's an impossible ask to ask kids to regulate themselves if parents are not regulated. So we have to be having that conversation as parents is, what am I projecting onto my child and what do I need to own as my own before I ask something of them? We can't co-regulate if we are not regulated. And as parents, that's our responsibility to be that anchor.
I mean, role models. The parents are supposed to be the role models. If we go back to the 1950s, and I'm not suggesting that the times were perfect. I don't think ever is a perfect time period. I think we should be learning. But do you think parents are getting more mature, or do you think that in many ways we're starting to act like children ourselves? Now you're laughing, Tiffany. You like that one.
I really, I love that question because I think we could probably ask that same question of every generation. And I think because we're in the seats that we are now, where we can look back to our childhoods and consider, what it was like when we were growing up, and we can consider, what the role of parenting is now, we have a particular perspective that allows us to kind of I think, consider that critically. I do believe, though, that there are many times where parents are pulled in so many directions. And I think to what you said a second ago, there's misunderstandings about the roles of, a school system, or the roles of a sports team, or an after school club, that they're going to kind of partner in this parenting of children. And in many ways, I think about, for parents who are working multiple jobs, maybe they're single parents, maybe they're taking care of, um, their own, adults in their lives. And, there's a lot of reasons that I think we turn to each other for that kind of support. What I think Katie and I would venture to offer to people is, what about having more conversation about what you need those relationships to look like? So if you're going into a school system and you're feeling totally overwhelmed, talk to the school about being totally overwhelmed, and how it's really helpful for you that they step in and share, whatever information about how they're supporting your child. And so for us, it's really coming down to a lot of conversations about conversations, how to go in, name what you need, be overt, discuss it, talk about it. And yeah, I do think that there are parents who are, somewhat childlike. That can be really great in some respects, and then that can be really harmful. But I don't think that that's new.
So corporations, I mean, they should share some sort of responsibility. The problem is morals and ethics tend to swing in the wind. So how does a young person, how do they guide their own lives when marketing professionals around the planet are in think tanks right now as we talk to figure out how to get our children, how to get them fat, how to get them hooked on some sugary substance forever, how to make them feel they need makeup, even though they're gorgeous, they're perfect in every way, to make them want to buy clothes, to make them look at their figure, to make them even to think that they're wrong, that they're not looking at life right, and that if they only look at these celebrities or internet influencers. So what should corporations do, or at least those companies that are trying to be socially responsible?
It's an interesting question. And I think piggybacks off some of your social media inquiries, right? Of how are we learning how to utilize this in our lives? Marketing and information it's coming at all of us fast. And in terms of frontal brain development, kids don't have that, right? To even be able to dissect, what am I taking in, and am I doing it intentionally, and what does that mean? And so just like in the 50s, we had to learn different skill sets. This is a part of the skill set that we have to help kids learn, just like we have to learn for ourselves. What is the integration into my life going to look like? How can I anchor myself? What am I taking in? How does that make me feel? We talk a lot about this level of curiosity. Can we be curious about, okay, I just was on my phone for X amount of minutes or hours. How do I feel afterward? What do I notice? What changes did I have experienced before I got on my phone and after I got off of it? So the more that we can learn and we can integrate that into our system from this place of curiosity, the more we're going to be able to be strategic users of whatever kind of mediums kids or adults, whoever, are interfacing with.
So as a father, how can I raise a strong and independent young woman, but also be sensitive, knowing that we are a little bit different. We think a little bit different. If I compare her to my beautiful son who's 13, I hurt her feelings without even trying to hurt her feelings. Whereas my son's a little bit tougher. So how do I can I treat them in this equal approach, knowing that men and women, at least at certain in certain areas, that we are slightly different. And that's okay. It's embracing those differences.
I love that question, because I would even add that if you had two children that were both boys or both girls, or had a ton of similarities, that you'd still need to do that parenting based on your child. And so I remember a dinner I was at, gosh, 10, 15 years ago, and a friend of mine's dad was talking about how his two sons were, really different in their, passions and the things that they did. His oldest son loved to go out and golf. And that's where they spent their time together. And his youngest son wanted nothing to do with golf and was, into art and museums. And he was talking about how important it was for him as a parent to get into the likes and dislikes and the different personalities of his kids. And that was his responsibility, so that he could meet them in a relationship and build connection. And I think that I've thought about that over many, many years of how, such a small shift for him as a parent of going, yeah, I'm not going to get my youngest son to go out and go golfing with us. So if I want a relationship with him, I've got to turn towards the things he cares about and the things that make him happy and have conversations about what makes him light up or the things that make him pissed off or whatever it is. And so I think it's about meeting kids in their interests, in the things that they care about, in conversations that show up for them. So, a young one who's saying, that really hurt my feelings, believing them in that, talking with them about that, knowing that that may be very, very different than another child who, you could say something and they think it was hilarious. It would be, now an inside joke between the two of you. So I think for parents, they decide how they're going to parent and then assume that works for everybody versus, and it's the same with coaches or teachers or people who are working with big groups of kids. We want to foster their individuality and the things that they care about and to turn towards the things that make them unique and who they are. And that's the moment of connection. That's the moment of intimacy that allows us to have long lasting relationships.
So, where we live, last year and the year prior, there had been a number of teenagers who had been committing suicide. This pressure on younger individuals to succeed and excel and deal with peer pressure and trolls. So, the teenagers of today, what are they dealing with, Katie? What's it look like? Because I'm an old man at 40. I can think that I know, but I really don't know.
Oh, I hear you. I actually was just leading a conference and this was the exact conversation of, right, at least during our era, the dinosaur era, if you will, like a 4.0 was as top as you could get, right? Like there was, and that was a very high bar. Like very, very few people got a 4.0. And now you hear these teenagers coming in of like, I'm getting a 4.8. What? A 4.8 on top of being a starting athlete and all of these volunteer opportunities of like, to your point, when do they rest and recover? When do they learn about what they need? When do they have this moment to be able to pause? Because right now it's never enough. A 4.8 GPA, like, are you kidding me?
That's amazing.
There's no ceiling.
What do you
Mm.
think, Tiffany?
The conversation about suicide is near and dear. I think and I appreciate you asking the question because I think we need to be in conversation about it 100 bazillion more times than we already are. So whether that's a real number or not, that's the hill I will die on. I think what's happening is exactly what Katie's saying is the pressures are huge. And what we know about suicide is it increases when people feel despair. And so it's the same with kids when there's a feeling of despair and a lack of connection. And so kids feel despair in so many different ways. And there's bad days that kids have, and then there are really bad days that kids have. And so when they have adults that they can turn to and feel seen and heard and affirmed for who they are, that's one of those antidotes that allows kids to not see suicide as an option. Kids who are living in environments that are not affirming of potentially their identity, their likes and interests, the things that make them unique, are wrought with, really significant despair on a regular basis, and then a lack of connection in terms of who they can turn to about that. So for kids who are, really living in that space of disconnection and isolation, suicide becomes an attractive option because it looks like and feels like a way to end that pain. And I think it's up to us as adults to take that very, very seriously. That's not a teacher problem. That's not a school problem. That's not a problem with peers. That's an adults who are around children and kids and young adults who have the largest percentage of suicide other than, over 60-year-old men. That young adult, period of time is incredibly sensitive. And so it's up to us. We have to turn towards them and build relationships and be in connection.
So, I took this course recently to be certified in mental health first aid. And one of the things at the end, they said that as a first responder is to have a self care plan. And I got to tell you, I failed. I'm like, a self care plan? You're telling me you should have one of these? So, how important, I'm going to ask both of you, how important is a self care plan? How do you create one? How do you develop one? Because you have the generations that came before were like, come on, be a woman or be a man, stand up. We're a little bit more sensitive, I think, our generation of today, but we're also under more stress, more anxiety, more uncertainty, more doubt. I mean, you turn on the news and all of a sudden AI is going to take your job. Why would you go to school? What's the point of your parents are stressed or frustrated and they can barely make it on two salaries? So, developing a self care plan, how does it begin?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question and something that we need more space around because we are such a go, go, go outcome oriented society in sport and beyond sport, right? Of we like to achieve, we like to perform. And I am one of those people to my bones. And I think it's why I love this topic so much, is because what we actually know is that both can exist. And we oftentimes think that it's one or the other. We're either going to do self care, and that's going to be this woo woo, I'm lazy, I'm just going to sit around and lounge all day, or I can be high achieving and I'm choosing one or the other. But what we know is that people can do both. And that's what is so important to name. And hopefully the skill that we can be teaching young people is that ability to shift gears, because we know if we can if we can intentionally recover and we can intentionally shift up in our gear to ask more of ourselves, our threshold is going to be higher. But we have to learn and we have to teach ourselves how to be able to have that maneuverability, that it doesn't mean you're failing or that you're going to struggle or lose your edge if you rest and recover. But that has to be an intentional choice. And to your point, Dustin, you have to have a plan for what that's going to look like. And you have to have leadership, whether that's through caregivers or coaches or teachers, to be able to say, you know what, right now let's actually come off the accelerator and let's coast for a minute. That's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. Let me help you learn what that can look like. And that's going to look different for every single person. But having a plan, what does recovery look like? Does that mean you're going to go out into the woods and you're just going to sit in nature, or you're going to go on a walk instead of doing interval training, or you're going to sit in your room and read a book, or you're going to meditate, or you're going to go to a yoga class? Knowing what is restorative for you, that is an outcome oriented. And for those of you that are like me who love the outcome and that's been a tough learning edge, knowing you're going to be able to ask more of yourself if you allow yourself the opportunity to recover. And that's the counterintuitive, kind of contradictory part that I love about mental health integration into sport in particular, is that it is a paradox. And so that can be really, really confusing and contradictory. But if we know we can hold space for both, I think that's the primary thing I hope folks take away.
What I'm hearing then is it's this mindset. And I was complaining to a friend of mine, a psychologist, last week, and she said, okay, is it a bad day or is it a bad month? I go, that's a good perspective. I went, it was a bad day. And she's like, but it wasn't a bad month. That many times we get stuck in this mindset of, well, it's bad every day, and go, okay, but hold on. Was it a bad 2 days or was it a bad year? So, how do we shift our mindset from, let's say, surviving to thriving? What do we have to do? What's that process?
I think the process is accepting that there are days that we are surviving and that there are times where it's really freaking hard. And that might mean because of what you're feeling internally, some bad news that you received, just a tough day, the type of day where, you spill the coffee and you trip when you walk down the sidewalk. And, it's just one of those kinds of days. So in the work that I do and that Katie and I do together is really focused on honoring and a lot of what Katie was just mentioning, that there are times that are really difficult. And if we can pause and just say, whoa, I'm having a hard day, or I'm having a hard couple days. This is really tough. Then that allows us to then look at what does it look like to be thriving. And if we're not slowing down and acknowledging the things that are challenging for us, and I mean that in like a legitimate way, I'm feeling left out in a group of friends, or, my boss was really tough on me today. I think what oftentimes with what you're saying, Dustin, is we get into this conversation where, oh, I'm having a bad day or things are so tough right now, but we don't specify. We don't turn to the people around us and say, what's happening, and giving them a chance to connect with us and let us know that what we're saying makes sense. That affirmation is part of really externalizing that stress versus just deciding everything, sucks for a period of time. And it does, it frees us up that space to acknowledge the things that are going really, really well. I think part of it is when we check in with our friends and family, we don't oftentimes name the things that are going really well either. We do this kind of in between thing of, oh, things are fine, it's good. And we, in some ways have this strange, moment of pause of, being able to say, and Katie and I have been wrestling with this a lot, of what is self-promotion and what is, just being excited about the things that we have coming up and being able to name that with the people that are really important to us. And so I've been trying to practice saying out loud the things I'm really excited about and the things that are going well right now, and owning that. And so I get to thrive in those moments of truth, but that also means I get to have moments that are really tough. And like I said a second ago, spilled coffee on myself in the morning, or, missed a meeting or something because I was stressed about another thing I had to do. So I think it's about really recognizing that those go hand in hand, and that they shift over time. Sometimes we have, that dip where things are pretty difficult for a while. And then we have times where we're just riding a wave of some goodness, and we have to relish in that, so that it can feed us in the ways that we need it to feed us.
How did this book change you, Katie?
Oh, I mean, it cracked my entire world open. I had a personal experience with athletics that was probably the primary catalyst for writing it for myself. And, we interviewed hundreds of women and coaches and administrators. And I think there was a part of me that really hoped it had improved, that the culture of sport had improved from when I was there 20 years ago, right? And hearing the heartbreak and the trauma and the impact that these women were left to nurture and heal when they stepped away from sport was devastating. It was devastating. And every single one still believes in sport, myself included, right? We would not be doing this work if there wasn't so much hope that we can create a system and a culture that empowers girls and empowers women and keeps them in sport, right? We're losing girls in sport because of the framework that isn't supporting them. And so it cracked me open and lit a fire of, we have to keep going. We have to fight for the next generation of kids going through the system. And I hope my kids play sport. I love sport so much that I would want them engaged in it if there's something they're passionate about. And I want to ensure that the system is healthy, that they are going to come out a better version of themselves than when they entered.
I mean, how did Nasir get away with this for so long, by the way? I mean, what happened? I mean, why didn't they stand in and stop Nasir and what he was doing? I mean, regarding the Olympics, I mean, how can I mean, I get shocked as a parent. I'm like, but why didn't the parents see it? Like, the signs were there. They had to be.
Hmm. I think we can have that post-mortem, about just about every traumatic event that has ever happened. And in that particular case, the things that were, so challenging are the fact that the system kept people in power that had the influence that they did, that were abusive. So when you're in a position of needing the system to do what it does in order to, in this case for these gymnasts, to be able to train with the top trainers, be able to, plan to go to, the Olympics, all of the things that were on the horizon, it's not that they weren't paying attention or the parents were, missing anything. It was that the system was doing what it does to protect somebody who was in a position of power that was causing harm. And for all of us outside of those systems, we can look at that and go, they should have done something so much sooner. And of course, we will stand by that sentiment. And the thing that tends to happen is perpetrators of abuse are protected by these very large systems because it becomes part of the, kind of the cycle, the pattern, how the system operates. And in many ways, and I still don't know what I think about this in terms of good or bad. I think it just is. It's really difficult for us in our human nature to believe that the worst is happening. It's really difficult. So we tend to hear something and we repackage it for ourselves as, well, it can't be that bad. That's probably not what's really happening, because it's so difficult for us to sit in that type of pain or that type of mistreatment. And so while I don't know exactly, how the system itself played it out in terms of parents and the conversations that we will never know about, but we also know that those young women were speaking up. We know that they were telling people. We know that they were asking for change. And the system protected the abuser for far too long. And that's where Katie and I's work, I think, is so important, and everyone else who's working in this field, because what we're really wanting is to create a space where we get to name the problems and then we get to come up with solutions. And when we're naming them, people are believing them. And so when athletes are saying this is happening, we don't put them in a position of kind of shush, don't talk, just go out there and perform. That we put them on the pedestal and we listen to what they're saying as truth, because it is. And that's where the system failed the gymnast. And quite frankly, the parents and the families and everyone else who was connected to
Hmm.
those gymnasts, given that they too are suffering and traumatized based on those events.
Now, I recognize that's probably an extreme, but that's probably gone on more times that have been reported, more issues, because it's hard for people to step forward. It's hard for them to come forward and do this. Now, pivoting it over to moms who are putting their kids first, but these were athletes, D1, D2, D3, maybe the local league. Getting back into sports, how do they give themselves permission to do that when they're trying to put every member of their family first?
Yeah, in terms of how should parents be letting their kids engage in sport?
Yeah, or the mothers themselves who were once athletes
Yeah.
and they're wanting to get back into sports.
It's interesting. That's one of the reasons that we started doing this. We were in clinical work for years, and there were trends working with women. And I'd oftentimes pause, and they didn't say anything about being an athlete. And I would ask the question of, like, did you ever compete in
Hmm.
some type of sport? And they'd be like, what? How did you know that? And there's this tendency and these characteristics and this innate way of being in the world that is correlated with one that would pursue athletics. However, when these women left sport, they were so traumatized, they were so harmed, there was so much damage that it becomes a part of your character and your core being that is hard to reconcile, right? We talk to women who were in cycling and sold all their bikes. I experienced this with running. I didn't run. I still have a hard time running. It's not a place of freedom anymore because of what it represents from that period of my life. And so I think having, to Tiffany's point, having those conversations and engaging in that dialogue of, let me hear your story. I want to understand the impact. It makes sense that you can't go into a swimming pool based off of what you experienced when you were a D1 athlete, right? That the impact that coaches and athletic system has lives on. It's a lifelong impact. And I think we need to name that and normalize that for women, because that's a significant barrier for them being able to engage in an activity or other activities that once provided them so much joy.
Now, as we move towards closing, Tiffany, what are you learning today?
Um, I think I'm pausing because I'm overwhelmed with a lot of thoughts. And so part of what I'm considering right now is how this conversation that we're having right now needs to be happening over and over and over again. Part of that is I think we would sit down with you, Dustin, and do this over and over and over again. But I also think it's so important for it to be occurring in spaces of athletes and coaches and parents and school teachers. And so what's sitting with me as we're wrapping up is how pivotal the conversations are and how meaningful it is to name the issues and really turn towards solutions that are tangible and real. And that's inspiring to me. The opportunities to name what's happening for people will forever be a privilege that I don't take for granted.
And Katie, how about you?
Yeah, I think the need for belonging, and I think it piggybacks off of what Tiffany's saying, but so oftentimes with mental health across the board, it's this isolated, somewhat shameful, internalized need or problem. And what I hope can happen, especially for young people, and I have so much hope that they're the ones changing the framework, but that people feel a sense of belonging and connectedness versus othered, or that they are the problem. The more we can be having these conversations, the more normalized it can be. That mental health is, we all have mental health, right? And it's a spectrum and it's going to change and we're going to have low days and high days. But
Yeah.
naming that for folks so that that can be something that is accessible, that doesn't have to be handled behind closed doors, but rather fully integrated into one's lives.
Well, I can tell you from my side, I get to interview a lot of incredible people, and you are two incredibly wise women. And you've taught me a number of things. And today, for me, I'm a learner. I've always been a learner. I recognize I know very little, is that I need to be more understanding of the women in my life, the women in my circle, because I don't know what they're going through. I don't know what my 11-year-old daughter is experiencing. But I know that the more I learn, the more I can read. And I'm really excited to get your book. Our dear friend Chris, he said, I will get a copy soon. I will give this out to every amazing person I know, men and women alike, to get the message to hearts around the world, because I'm like you. I believe we have an obligation to leave this world better than the way we found it. And I think we have an obligation to free our voice. So thank you both for joining me on Free Your Voice.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Dustin.